You ever walk outside, coffee in hand, expecting a quiet Saturday, and instead find a fake parking ticket slapped on your truck by a guy in a knockoff sheriff's uniform? Yeah. That was my morning. I'm Trent Dalton. I've lived in Pine Creek Meadows for 8 years. Blue-collar guy, work in HVAC, drive a lifted black Ram 2500. It's loud. It's legal. And yes, it's always parked in my own damn driveway. So when I walked out to grab my tool bag and saw a yellow carbon copy slip tucked under my wiper, I thought it was a joke. But nope, this thing had a violation number, a seal that looked suspiciously homemade, and a fine of $200 for unauthorized commercial vehicle on Residential Street. Right as I was squinting at it, I heard the shrill voice that could curdle milk. About time someone enforced the rules around here. Trent, came the bark from across the street. I turned and saw her Karrenna Templeton, HOA board president, queen of the clipboard, and certified menace to anyone who didn't plant their rose bushes exactly 6 inches apart. She was standing on her porch in her usual pastel tracksuit, arms crossed like she'd just solved crime of the century. What the hell is this? I held up the slip. She marched over like she owned the pavement. That's a citation. We've hired a private enforcement liaison to help us crack down on code violations. Your truck is way out of compliance. Private enforcement liaison? I repeated. That's not a thing. She gestured toward the end of my driveway, where a guy in a tan sheriff-style outfit stood writing in a little notepad. Aviator's badge-shaped patch that said Pine Creek Enforcement Unit and a belt full of fake-looking gear that screamed Halloween costume clearance rack. I walked up to him. You law enforcement? I'm authorized by the HOA to write citations, he said, not looking up. His name tag read Deputy Rowley. You're in violation. Tickets already written. Cool. Then you won't mind waiting here while I call someone who is actually law enforcement. He didn't respond. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called my brother-in-law, Nolan. He's a real cop. Not a rent-a-badge. Real badge. Real cuffs. Works city patrol 2 districts over. But he lives 10 minutes away. Karrenna scoffed. Oh, please. You're just mad you finally got caught. No, Karrenna, I said. I'm mad you're letting some dude play dress-up and harass residents. Watch your tone, Trent. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. We're cracking down. You're not above the rules. No, but I am above letting some HOA cosplay cop ticket my personal property. 15 minutes later, Nolan pulled up in his cruiser. Lights off but uniform on. He got out, took one look at the fake badge, and his whole posture changed. Sir, he said to Rowley, can I see your credentials? Rowley puffed his chest. I'm a contracted officer of the HOA. Cool, Nolan said. Let me see your law enforcement ID. I don't need one. I'm authorized by the board. Nolan raised an eyebrow. So, no post certification? No badge number? No agency affiliation? Rowley started to sweat. I don't answer to the city. Just the HOA. That's what I thought, Nolan said, stepping forward. Turn around. Hands behind your back. What? Karrenna shrieked. You can't arrest him. He's doing his job. No, ma'am, Nolan said, pulling out his cuffs. He's impersonating a peace officer. That's a felony. Rowley tried to backpedal, literally, but Nolan had him cuffed in seconds. This is harassment, Karrenna shouted. We have rights. Nolan turned to her. What you don't have is the authority to authorize anyone to wear a badge and issue fake citations. This is impersonation, and if you had anything to do with it, you'd better lawyer up. Her face turned beet red. I didn't. I mean, the board. We didn't think. I crossed my arms, watching as Rowley was led to the back of the cruiser. Karrenna was sputtering excuses, but nobody was listening. A few neighbors had come out, filming with their phones. And me? I just leaned against my truck, took a long sip of my coffee, and smiled. Karrenna didn't storm off. She didn't scream or faint. She just stood there, frozen, as Nolan shut the cruiser door behind the guy she'd hired to play Barney Fife with a laser printer and some Velcro. I wasn't in the mood to gloat, which was new for me. Instead, I walked past her without a word and headed back up my driveway. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't really care anymore. By the time I grabbed my keys and slid into the truck, I could hear the whispers starting from across the street. Old Man Rourke was shaking his head like he'd just watched a dog walk on its hind legs. Even the Jennings kid, who never paid attention to anything outside his phone, had his screen aimed right at the cruiser as it pulled away. The HOA had drawn first blood. But that stunt with the fake badge? That wasn't just a power trip, it was desperation. The next morning, I found out why. I was elbow deep in the air intake of a commercial unit over at the Oakdale Shopping Center when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor, Claire, 3 houses down. Her husband was deployed overseas, and she didn't usually bother me unless something was serious. The message was short. You need to see this. Check the HOA site. Now, I wiped the grime off my hands, pulled up the HOA's digital bulletin board, and there it was: new emergency amendments to the community charter, passed in a special session that had apparently occurred at 9 the night before. They'd added a clause allowing the board to contract auxiliary enforcement personnel during periods of elevated noncompliance. Another clause proposed a special assessment fee, $150 per household, to fund administrative and security upgrades. I didn't know whether to laugh or drive straight home and start knocking on doors. Instead, I made a call. "Trent?" said a voice on the other end. "Erica, got a minute?" Erica Morales was a city council member from the district over. She owed me a favor years ago. I'd replaced her dead sea compressor during a heat wave when nobody else would take the job. She didn't forget that kind of thing. I need to know if a homeowners association has the legal authority to create their own enforcement division and collect special assessments without a full vote. There was a pause. They absolutely do not. Not unless every change was passed with proper notice, quorum, and voting record. And even then, there are limits. I exhaled slowly. They're doing it anyway. Send me everything. By sundown, Erica had looped in a contact at the city attorney's office. A formal inquiry was launched before I even finished dinner. That night, I hosted a backyard meeting. I didn't send out flyers or post anything online too risky. I just talked to people face to face, told them to bring a chair and an open mind. By 6, I had 23 neighbors packed around my fire pit, 2 folding tables, and the back of my truck bed. This isn't about trucks or paint colors anymore, I told them. They're rewriting the rules in the middle of the night and charging us for the privilege. A retired paralegal named Donna pulled out a manila folder. These amendments weren't even filed with the county. I checked this morning. A guy in a Carhartt jacket, Kevin, I think, leaned forward. "You saying what they're doing is illegal?" "I'm saying," I replied, "this isn't just bad management. It's fraud." Murmurs started spreading through the group. A few people pulled out their phones. Someone passed out copies of the so-called emergency amendments. The temperature outside was dropping, but nobody left. Then Claire stood up. "They tried to fine me for having a satellite dish. Said it was against regulation. But we got that installed before the HOA even existed." "Exactly," I said. "They're counting on us not knowing our rights." That night, we formed what we started calling the Pine Creek Defense Committee. Not exactly a revolution, but close enough. Donna volunteered to help with legal filings. Kevin offered to dig through land use records. Claire began drafting a formal complaint to the state HOA Oversight Board. Meanwhile, Erica's city attorney contact confirmed what we suspected. Impersonating an officer wasn't the only crime on the table. Misappropriation of funds, falsifying legal documents, and unauthorized assessments were all potentially prosecutable offenses. By Thursday, subpoenas were in motion. The state's Department of Community Affairs assigned an investigator to the case after receiving multiple written complaints. Their rep, a guy named Mark Holcomb, showed up in a beige sedan and a no-nonsense attitude. He wasn't there to shake hands or chat about landscaping. He was there to dig. He started with the HOA's financial records. Except surprised, the treasurer, Harold Bixby, claimed the files had been accidentally deleted during a software update. Mark didn't buy it. He handed Harold a formal demand letter and told him he had 72 hours to produce either the records or a sworn affidavit explaining their disappearance. Harold looked like a man who just realized he was holding a live grenade. I didn't see Karrenna for 2 days. Her pastel SUV stayed hidden in her garage, and her usual morning patrol walks vanished. But on Saturday, she finally resurfaced, this time with a lawyer in tow. They tried to hold a closed-door board meeting at the rec center. But word got out fast, and by the time they got there, 24 residents were waiting outside, demanding entry. Mark showed up 10 minutes later, badge on his belt and a recorder in hand. I understand you're conducting HOA business, he said calmly. This is a private meeting, Karrenna's lawyer replied. Not when it involves potential misuse of community funds and fraudulent enforcement actions, Mark said. You'll open those doors, or I'll file for access under the Sunshine Law first thing Monday. They opened the doors. What followed was a 3-hour reckoning. Mark questioned each board member under oath, recorded everything, and collected copies of emails, private memos, and votes that had never been made public. At one point, he held up a printout. This internal memo refers to selective enforcement against high-visibility residents. Care to explain that phrase? Karrenna's mouth tightened. We needed to maintain order. By targeting vocal homeowners? Mark pressed. Some people refuse to cooperate, she said, eyes darting toward me. Or refuse to be bullied, I said, loud enough for the room to hear. No one told me to sit down. By the end of the session, the board's lawyer was visibly sweating. Mark collected the last of the documents, gave a brief nod, and walked out without another word. The next day, the county sent notice of an interim injunction. All HOA enforcement activity was suspended pending investigation. No more fines. No more assessments. No more midnight meetings. You could feel the shift in the air. People started waving again. Garage doors stayed open longer. Even Mr. Rourke came over that evening to ask if I'd help him install a new flagpole. The HOA hadn't been dismantled yet, but its grip was broken. And as for Karrenna, she was spotted at the UPS store 2 towns over, mailing what looked like a thick packet of documents. Resignation papers, maybe. Or a desperate plea to a lawyer who couldn't fix what she broke. Either way, the game had changed. And Pine Creek Meadows was no longer their playground. 2 weeks after the board meeting imploded, Pine Creek Meadows was living in the unfamiliar quiet of a power vacuum. No new memos, no clipboard patrols, and most importantly, no more fraudulent citations. For a neighborhood that had been micromanaged to death, it felt like breathing with both lungs for the first time. But just because the board had gone quiet didn't mean they were done. It was Kevin who caught it first. He stopped by my place with a USB stick and a look that said we were about to lose our entire Saturday to something ugly. I pulled the HOA's filings from the county archives, he said, handing me the stick. Found something buried in the original incorporation papers. I plugged it into my laptop while he paced behind me. They filed as a non-profit civic organization under a specific clause 1 that requires annual audits and prohibits any board member from drawing income. I clicked through the scanned PDFs and saw what he meant. The language was clear. The HOA was supposed to operate entirely on unpaid volunteer work with financial transparency and no personal compensation. Kevin leaned over the screen. Now flip to their internal budget from last quarter. When I opened the spreadsheet Claire had obtained during the investigation, I nearly choked on my coffee. There it was: Administrative Leadership Disbursement, $12,000 labeled under K. Templeton. Next to it, 3 more entries under other board members, all marked as consulting fees. They've been paying themselves, I said. Kevin nodded. And not just a little. That's nearly $50,000 over the past fiscal year. We knew what to do. Erica had already put us in touch with a local prosecutor from the Financial Crimes Division. Her name was Ava LeClaire, a sharp-eyed woman who didn't mince words and didn't waste time. She agreed to meet us at the municipal building that afternoon. Kevin and I showed up with copies of the documents, a prepared summary, and a portable drive with everything organized by folder and date. Ava scanned the files in silence for several minutes. Then she looked up. "This isn't just misappropriation," she said, tapping the screen. "It's embezzlement, nonprofit fraud, and depending on how those funds were moved, possibly tax evasion." Kevin whistled low through his teeth. "They're done," she said simply. "But I need more bank records, email chains, anything showing they knowingly authorized these payouts while claiming nonprofit status." Erica, who had joined us halfway through the meeting, leaned forward. "I know someone who might help with that. The HOA's former secretary. She quit last year without saying why. I have her number." That night, we met with her. Her name was Lydia, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with a spine of rebar. She invited us into her kitchen, poured 4 glasses of sweet tea, and handed over a cardboard file box like it was a live grenade. "I kept everything," she said. "I knew it was wrong, but they threatened to sue me if I spoke out." Inside the box were printed emails, handwritten notes, and copies of cash checks bearing board members' names. One memo had been signed by Karrenna herself, approving a contractor retention bonus payable directly to her personal account. "I warned her," Lydia said. "Told her this was going to explode. But she thought as long as nobody looked too closely, they could ride it out." She gave us permission to hand the evidence over to authorities. The next morning, I dropped the box off at Ava's office. She didn't say thank you. She said, "Get ready." By Friday, subpoenas were in motion. Not the polite kind, either the knock on your door at dawn kind. First to get served was Harold, the treasurer. Neighbors watched from their porches as 2 plainclothes agents escorted him out of his house with a box of documents under his arm and a pale expression that said he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Next was Karrenna. She tried to put up a fight, claimed harassment, threatened to go public with the truth, and even accused the city of violating her rights as a private community administrator. But Ava didn't flinch. She filed formal charges: felony embezzlement, falsification of nonprofit records, and wire fraud. Bail was set too high for Karrenna to walk free before a hearing. The news spread like wildfire. Local outlets picked it up. HOA president arrested in major fraud scandal. Ran across the bottom of the screen while I was eating dinner. Neighbors started calling, asking if we'd be holding another backyard meeting. We did. This time, it wasn't about organizing resistance. It was about rebuilding. Claire brought out a whiteboard. Donna had drawn up a new set of bylaws, ones that required full public accounting, quarterly open forums, and term limits. We nominated a temporary committee to oversee the transition until legitimate elections could be held. I didn't want a seat, didn't need one, but I agreed to help with oversight. That night, some of us walked the neighborhood, checking in on folks who'd stayed quiet through the whole ordeal. One elderly couple told us they'd stopped attending meetings years ago because they felt unwelcome. Another man admitted he'd been fined so often for unapproved lawn decorations that he stopped decorating altogether. Now they wanted to be heard again. 2 weeks later, the new charter passed by unanimous vote. The city recognized the restructured HOA as a compliant, volunteer-run body. Ava's office confirmed that charges against the former board were moving forward, with plea negotiations underway for 2 members who had turned cooperative. One of them was Harold. He provided Ava with a full accounting of how the funds had been diverted, including proof that the fake sheriff, Rowley, had been paid under the table using cash pulled from the Community Beautification Fund. He had no contractor license, no background check, just a printed badge and a promise to deal with the noisy ones. That led to another charge: conspiracy to impersonate an officer. Rowley pled guilty in exchange for a suspended sentence and community service. He now spends weekends picking up trash along the freeway in an orange vest that says volunteer. Karrenna didn't get off so easy. Her trial date was set and her lawyer's strategy blaming the board for everything while painting her as a misled figurehead backfired when Ava played a voicemail where she openly bragged about keeping the neighborhood in line. Her bail was revoked after that. The neighborhood changed in ways that surprised even me. People started talking again, not just waving from driveways but actually stopping to chat. The Jennings kid helped Old Man Rourke install a new solar light on his porch. Claire organized a block party, complete with food trucks and a dunk tank where Kevin spent most of the afternoon getting soaked to the cheers of a dozen kids. And me? I finally got around to repainting the trim on my place. No fines. No warnings. Just a few neighbors offering to help and someone dropping off a six-pack as thanks for standing up when it counted. As I stood back one evening, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, Nolan pulled up in his cruiser again. He leaned out the window, nodding toward my driveway. No more tickets? I gave him a sideways look. Only kind I get now, say, welcome to the neighborhood barbecue. Bring a chair. He laughed and handed me a folded flyer. City's looking for a new community liaison. Someone to help neighborhoods stay on track without overstepping. I told them I knew a guy. I didn't say yes. Not right away, but I kept the flyer, just in case, because Pine Creek Meadows had finally learned something it should have known all along. A neighborhood isn't a set of rules. It's the people who live there and what they're willing to stand up for when someone tries to take it from them. The trial came faster than anyone expected. Karrenna had burned through 2 different attorneys before settling on a third. A stiff man with a pinched face and a voice like dry paper. He filed delay motions, tried to suppress evidence, and even attempted to have Ava removed from the case for bias. None of it stuck. The court wasn't in the mood for games. It opened on a gray Monday morning with a line of people stretching out the courthouse doors. Most were from Pine Creek Meadows. Some came to support the prosecution. A few, mostly older board loyalists, still clung to the idea that this was all a misunderstanding. But most were just there to see the end of it. I took a seat near the back, next to Donna and Kevin. Claire sat 2 rows ahead with her daughter, holding a notepad already cluttered with bullet points and underlines. She never looked at Karrenna once. Lydia was called first. She stepped up to the stand with quiet steel, clutching a folder under one arm. Her voice was even, measured, but every word landed like a nail through drywall. She knew exactly what she was doing, Lydia said. She signed the checks. She told us to keep quiet. When I asked if we should file the disbursements with the nonprofit registry, she said, "It's not their business what we do with our own money." The defense objected, but the judge overruled it. Ava laid out the financial records next. Each one was authenticated, time-stamped, and matched with bank statements. The jury followed along grimly as she walked them through over a dozen separate transactions, some disguised as contractor payments, others buried in vague budget lines like community engagement. Then came the kicker. Rowley was called to testify. He entered wearing plain clothes, looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His voice shook when he confirmed what we all suspected. He had never been licensed, never trained, and had responded to a Craigslist ad posted anonymously. The job description had read, neighborhood enforcement agent. Must be assertive. Uniform provided. They gave me a badge, he said, holding up a photo Ava displayed on the monitor. They printed it on laminate. I didn't ask questions. They said I'd be safe as long as I stuck to their list. What list? Ava asked. He glanced at me in the gallery before answering. They gave me names. A short list. Said those people needed to be kept in line, examples, they called them. I was told to make up infractions if I had to. Just write tickets. Take pictures. Make them uncomfortable. That was the first time I saw the jury shift in their seats with real anger. Ava turned to the judge. We'd like to enter into evidence the list recovered from the HOA's internal drives. It matches with every resident who received a fabricated violation. The judge nodded. The defense tried to recover, but it was like throwing a towel on a house fire. They argued Karrenna hadn't personally authorized Rowley's actions, that the payments were clerical errors, that the board operated as a group and she couldn't be held solely responsible. Ava responded by playing a voicemail. Karrenna's voice filled the courtroom. He's just there to make noise. If they start whining about rights, hit them with something official-looking. We need them rattled. No one spoke for a few seconds after that. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Kevin leaned close. That's game. The jury took less than 3 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all charges: embezzlement, non-profit fraud, conspiracy to impersonate a public official, and targeted harassment under state civil code. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge didn't hold back. Karrenna was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with no chance of early parole. 2 other board members received probation and community service for cooperating fully. The court ordered full restitution of all misused funds, to be paid back to the community over the next 5 years, with liens placed on their assets. Rowley was sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation and banned from working in any civic or enforcement-related role for life. As for Pine Creek Meadows, things didn't go back to the way they were before. They got better. The temporary committee we'd formed dissolved once elections were held. The new board was made up of people who hadn't touched a clipboard in their lives, people like Claire, Kevin, and an elementary school teacher named Sophia who had moved in just 6 months before everything went down. Nobody ran unopposed. Every position was contested. Every vote counted. The first thing they did was publish every budget, meeting minute, and policy draft on a new public portal. The second thing they did was formally dissolve the old enforcement program. They even held a shred party where residents could feed old HOA citations into a rented industrial shredder. Claire brought cupcakes. The city stepped in to oversee the reformation process, ensuring the new HOA charter complied with state nonprofit laws. Ava made a surprise appearance during one of the first public meetings just to let folks know the DA's office would be watching. Not in a threatening way, in a "you have our support" kind of way. Nolan stopped by a few weeks later while I was working on my garage extension. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You ever think about running?" he asked. I didn't look up from the drill. "For what?" "Board president." I snorted. "Not my scene. Doesn't have to be," he said. "But it's good to have someone who knows how to fix things when they break." I looked around at the neighborhood, at the freshly painted homes. The kids playing ball without anyone yelling at them to stay off lawns. The old guy walking his dog without being stalked by a clipboard. "Nah," I said finally. "I think I'll stick to fixing air conditioners." He laughed and gave me a nod before heading back to his cruiser. A month after the sentencing, the community held its first neighborhood festival. No themes. No dress code. Just music, food, and a dunk tank where, this time, Claire convinced Ava to take a turn in the seat. She agreed after Donna promised to match every $10 raised with a donation to a local family shelter. People danced. Someone brought fireworks. A kid handed me a drawing of my truck with the words, "Thank you for saving our street," scrawled in red crayon. I took it home and tacked it inside my garage. No one ever tried to ticket my truck again. Not because I scared them off. Not because Nolan lived nearby. But because the neighborhood had learned something the hard way: rules are fine until they're used like weapons. And the people who live on a street? They're not obstacles. They're the foundation. Pine Creek Meadows had been built on trust once. It took a hit, but it rebuilt stronger. Not because of one person, but because a whole block decided enough was enough. And I'll tell you what, my coffee tastes better now. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the freedom. Or maybe it's just knowing that the next time someone tries to slap a fake badge on their chest and play tyrant, they're gonna find out real quick what happens when a neighborhood fights back.